I think we just want to kind of open up the thinking a little bit, and these were kind of some stream of conscious questions we came up with, and I think the floor is pretty open. I think one thing that I would like for us to talk a little bit about is how we tie some of these ideas back into making decisions in environmental health contexts. I think there's a lot of areas that come to my mind where there are seemingly disparate data, where there are complicated decisions to be made, where some synthesis of what we've talked about over the last day and a half might help guide us. And I'm wondering if anybody has any thoughts on that or anything tangential to that. So I'll prime the pump. What I was specifically thinking about there was how do we take things that are, for instance, observational studies from EPI and things like that, and design experiments and basically help them meet in the middle.
Risha, again, always having a comment. I would say that when you're trying to combine data that are different, one of my risk communication colleagues, David Sarno, explained to me that you can combine apples and oranges as long as you understand the result is fruit salad. When we're talking about terminology, sometimes what we have to find is a new way of explaining that what we have is a chimera. And chimeras can be useful, but then we have to figure out what chimeras do.
Lance?
I liked the presentation earlier today from Sage about encouraging, with capital letters, collaboration and kind of growing that. So to the second point about investments and research questions and so on, as a statistician, I collaborate on a lot of projects. The ones I don't like to collaborate with are the ones where they call me the day before the grant's due and says, I've got this great tool, can I have all your data? Or can we work together on it? Because we've had no time to sort of think about something different. We're either going to do what I want to do or we're going to do what they want to do, but we're not going to do something that's really the interesting stuff in the middle. So I was really struck this morning in that discussion. I know it's a little heavy-handed on the funder side to encourage that, but making it really clear what they want and setting up a mechanism to do that. And it's tricky because if you put out a call for data integration, you might get some great computer science ones, and you might get some interesting epidemiology ones, and they're both part of what you want, and trying to get them trying to figure out how to encourage that to happen. And you need an open-minded epidemiologist and an open-minded computer scientist and an open-minded environmental engineer, and they can do some really interesting stuff. But it's not just about having them on the co-PI list. So I think I would be interested in seeing those kind of things develop from what we've heard today and other things that we've all referenced from our own. I think all the good stuff happens at the edges of our comfort zone, our disciplines, and that's where the really interesting potential for all this is. I mean, I think there's not the best person in the room to handle this problem, but there are some tables of people that could do some pretty remarkable stuff, and we're not the only ones like that.
One brief comment on that, which is, so there was a call, the prime call last year for, statistics and multi-pollutant epidemiology, and I was on that study section, and without really revealing anything proprietary, it was, there weren't a lot of truly integrative proposals that were submitted. So just having a call is not enough. So you need to build something in the community up to that, so that there will be those proposals that come in.
I totally agree with that. I think it is hard and trying to figure out, and I think there's been some successes of these sort of phase one things that are smaller to show you're moving in the right direction. So I was on the Committee on Applied and Theoretical Statistics, and we were struggling with how does data science fit in with the statistics profession for a long time. And we had one call, and there was a very busy, important person on the call. And setting up the call, we said, we want to do something besides just give people a bunch of data, let's see what they can find. And they said, I can't stay on the call the whole time, I just want to add, we should give people a bunch of data and see what they can find. Thanks, gotta go. And it's the one person we wanted to hear the message told us what we didn't want to say and then was gone. So.
Yeah, so my other comment was, is actually back to your question, Patrick. How much of what we were talking about, particularly yesterday, in terms of data integration, is not so much informing decisions, but identifying problems for which we need to make decisions, the problems that we don't know that we have right now. And so maybe some of it is actually helping better problem formulation. So we're not just trying to make the same decisions over and over, refining our current decisions, but actually opening the world to maybe different types of decisions that we could make. And maybe actually the engineering part has, and what was just talked about in terms of the infrastructure side or the context side of it, also needs to be brought in to, again, expand the range of possible decisions and problems that we could potentially solve and address.
So I think, Lance started the day yesterday with this graphic of kind of the iterative process of research, asking questions, doing something, using that to ask more questions. And I intuitively, that's what I like about the work that I do. But the other side of that is that there are specific instances. So take what Chris discussed yesterday and what Tim discussed yesterday, where we have very specific, very kind of closed decisions that we have to make. And how do we balance that that kind of innovative cycle of question asking to what Tim described as what did he call it? Enough precision to make a decision. When do you stop? I'm sorry, Kathy.
So I think I totally agree that it is important to do this interdisciplinary work, but it is extremely hard to actually talk to each other. Because if you say prototype and I say prototype, we might refer to a completely different thing. So in our case, we might be able to use formulas. That's good. But if you now bring in stakeholders and others, they might not be very comfortable in that kind of discussion. So then visualizations actually are another alternative. And so you start doing napkin drawings, and that's very powerful. And I think then more and more people can understand what we are truly talking about. And by the way, human beings are good in interpreting those drawings. Maybe that's the only thing we are still good at compared to machines. So visualization has a lot going for itself there. What we also try to do is to empower many to contribute to the making of those maps and to see themselves in those maps. So if you, for instance, are a data provider, you must have a way to get your data onto that map. And this way you will feel that it's your map because you're nicely represented, especially if you have really good data, which is really big. So you're going to take a lot of space up on that map. You have your own name on there. So this incentivizes others to now also add really good data to that overall data integration problem. And by the way, this visual interface to all that data ultimately disappears because the discussion becomes about the data and about the quality and the coverage and the many different facets you can now use to search and look at that data. And maybe there are even machine learning and other algorithms that also can run over that data. But ultimately, the discussion point or vehicle is that map. Now, the next part, I think, which comes up very quickly after you have that data integration positive feedback loop going, because now many more people are trying to get on that map as well. And you get to see that they just added something when you come with your coffee into your office every morning. After you have that going, you really then need to make sure you bridge that last mile. And you already mentioned the life straw. And that's a great example of a great technology which my husband happily uses on the lake when he gets very, very dehydrated after windsurfing. But it's not working for the original problem it was designed for. And I think in many cases, policymakers, they are driving on a very fast-paced highway, like a German highway with a really good car, 280, right? Very fast. Now, what we oftentimes give them is something where they have to climb out of the window, open the hood, do some changes in the engine, come back in just so that they can now drive in a different way, in a better way. They just don't have the means to do this. They are holding on to their steering wheel for their dear life. So I think that disconnect between the levers they have and what we give them is a really serious disconnect. And again, AAAS, you can talk with them and you can have a milkshake with them, and that makes a huge difference. And at the same time, I think after you have your checkbox on the tenure, by working closely with them, this also extremely is very beneficial. So I think there are these two things, the last mile problem and talking to each other so that we understand each other.
So,
oh, please, David.
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to say one thing I really took away from your visualization work yesterday was, one, take a hard look at your own, what you've done, right? And there's ways to improve it and things you can do. And I would encourage everyone to look at, I actually went back and started reading some of these books last night. And I think that visualization is so key for communication that it is, looking at these kind of books, it's actually art, right? It's like fun art about science. And so it's fun. And so it's accessible. And the same is like, one of the tools I developed at EPA was a drawing on a napkin on a plane on the way back from an unsuccessful meeting in DC, where we were trying to communicate new methods to policymakers, and we had failed to communicate the value of those methods, right? And so we came back the next time with this picture, and it's not that they understood the picture and all the implications of it, but they said, tell me more about your methods now, right? It went back. And I think that, especially as academics, right, if the end product is a publication, that's essentially a tombstone of your data, if that's where it ends, right? It's like, I have a vast data graveyard, and it's called PubMed, and that's where all my science went to die, right? But if you go back and go on to these communication opportunities, or create software that people can use, or work with someone who can create software or some sort of viz tool that it can use, you can start adding these data to things and have people actually interact with them, rather than saying that these data were gathered over a cohort study of 20 years, and I published a paper, and that's the best and only analysis that will ever happen on them. And so I think there's ways to do that, but I think the viz stuff is really key.
Thanks, David. So we'll go to Barry, and then that'll close out, and I'll turn it over to Kim.
Yeah, just sort of agreeing, I think, that data integration is it's an important concept, but it's not all that we need, right, for this decision-making goal. So I think what's happening, like John Wilbanks pointed out, is we need to develop a new model for around this increasing access and presentation of actually a huge amount of heterogeneous data that we've never really had access to before. So I think what's going to be important is developing a model around which we can come to our own conclusions. I think scientific publishing is going to change on that. It's give me a look and an understanding and presentation of the data so I can come to my own conclusion. And perhaps in this collaborative sense, it's really so not so much we can integrate the data, but we can put the presentation of what we currently know from our different disciplines on the table, have a good conversation. So it's a knowledge sharing exercise. Not necessarily reach the same conclusion, because we may have different points of view or values, but at least understand when we have agreement, and also understand when we have disagreement. So it's, in the end, it's sort of a wisdom integration we have to support, not just the data integration.
Wonderful.
That's it.